is Kiddushin al menat she'echzor toch Yud Bet Chodesh. That forged a new type of da'at Kiddushin. Right? That would make it much harder to be mevatel. Okay? If you look at it that way. I think this point is machlok between the Rambam and the Ravid. Take a look here. Yeah, it's in the page that I gave out. The other side, which has the Meshach on the bottom, there's a Rambam here from the Hilchot Shut Perek Zayin Halacha Chaf Gimel. Everybody have it? Yeah. Hamikadesh al Tnai v'chazar achar kama yamim ubitel hatnai. Are you with me? Af al pi shebitlo beino leveina, knows without Eidim, shelo b'fnei Eidim, batel hatnai, v'arehi mikudeshet stam. Means not mikudeshet stam, but mikudeshet without a Tnai. That's what. V'chein im hayat Tnai min ha'isha, if it was l'tovat ha'isha, ubitla oto achar kach beina leveino, batel hatnai. Okay. Lefichach hamekadesh al Tnai v'kines stam. He did kiddushin al Tnai, but then he did chuppah and he didn't state the Tnai again. O baal stam. Harezot tzricha get. Afapi shalom nitkayem atnai. Because the Tnai with choshesh that the Tnai is batel. Shema bitel atnai kishebaal o shekines. Okay. So the Rambam says that that also there's a possibility of mevatel the Tnai afterwards, and you don't need a dut for bitul Tnai. And that's important. The Ravid disagrees on that point. If you look at the end, they made it Tnai, and then they said, you know what? Forget it.
Right. And then
so then the Tnai, then she's mikudeshet without the Tnai.
Right, but what was the other case? They made it Tnai, and then what did he do? What's with the stam one where he?
There's just a number of different examples. The same.
No, but I don't understand that example. I'm sorry.
Which example don't you understand?
They had relations without saying this is
right.
with the Tnai in place.
Which
they
is
just
the
had
Tnai
relations stam, so
meaning
it's.
You have to not learn a new fact about Tnai that I make the Tnai in the Kedushin, and then when I do the Nisuin, I have to verbally state the
That's
Tnai
implicit in the Gemara. That's what we're talking about next week. Yes. Right. Otherwise, with Choshesh, the question is whether it's a suffix or it's vadai, because and why that is, right? That there was bittul Tnai afterwards. That they agreed, and even though there are no Eidim, you don't need Eidim from bittul Tnai. In other words, he made it Tnai, and then they were married for a week, and he said, you know what? Forget it, right? We're Mekudesh without the Tnai. And she's Mekudesh, even though they'll never fulfill the Tnai. Okay? So you can move out to the Tnai. And it can be no Beino Leveina. There's no requirement of Eidim.
I feel like this is such a risk for the woman. Meaning,
No, it has to be consensual.
If the Tnai is Latovato, if the Tnai is Latovata, she has the power to move out. She has the power to move out to the Tnai. Right? In other words, if it's Amanat Shetitain Li, if she says,
no, but not just to her, because we just assume that the action is Chal. So let's say his son doesn't do the Tnai because he doesn't want to fulfill her Tnai. Then
no, if the Tnai is not fulfilled, then there's no Kiddushin.
But no Eidim happened. Now we go to he
How
said,
you
I married her, and she says, what? We had a Tnai. And he said, no, we were Mavatal it.
No, so how would you believe it? It's only if there's some sort of Untana if they're Mavatal the Tnai. Like having relations.
Correct, but that's why I'm confused by maybe she assumes I'm having relations because we have this.
So then if you know, well, you want it to Tnai, you speak to a lawyer beforehand, you tell what do I have to do to make sure the Tnai is a Tnai?
So that's the only thing, and this doesn't go with your type of language, the only way I can understand this whole idea about the actions and stronger than Tnai is, I want to say that either of them. If you care so much about this darn Tnai, make sure he's a lady beforehand, or make sure that before you even do the Maaseh.
Right, so this is what you're...
Because I was willing to risk doing the Maaseh with the Tnai that I don't really care so much about the Tnai.
Okay, that's right. Okay, so what you're saying, I want to get to that point. We're not up to that yet, but okay, so I might as well explain it now. There are different levels there's a Tosfot that says this explicitly in Kiddushin, which we'll get to. There are different levels of da'at. Right? If I want to buy a Ferrari, right? I go into the store and there's this red Ferrari that I really want, right? And they deliver it and there's no engine. I'll say, the mekach is butter. There was no engine. Oh, you didn't say you wanted an engine. You saw it and you said you want to buy what was in the showroom. I gave you what was in the showroom. There's no engine. You didn't stipulate you wanted an engine. So what do we answer to that guy? We say there's certain things you have to stipulate. That's called mekach tos, right? That's a fatal flaw in the contract. Okay? For that you don't have to stipulate, because I don't want the body of the Ferrari. I want the Ferrari with the V12 engine, whatever it is, right? That's what I want, right? And that's not what this is not what I bought. Okay? Then there's something else, right? I want the Ferrari, and it comes with different hubcaps that I didn't, right? So then I say, no. I made it. There, if you wanted those special hubcaps, you should have said so. Okay? There needs fundamentally, I now want to carry that over, right? Fundamentally, when a person is mekadesh, or if a man is megaresh, he wants to be mekadesh and he wants to be megaresh. That fundamental dot is there. Right? But that's why I talked about it in terms of an add-on. Right? The Tnai is an add-on. Right? So then you can say if the Tnai is pasul, right, because it didn't fulfill the requirements of Bnei Gad Bnei Ruvain, you have enough dot, the fundamental dot for Kiddushin is there. Right? Because they wouldn't be staying on the chuppah, the whole thing. Right? Obviously, in the case of Gittin and Kiddushin, the person wants to be Megaresh, he wants to be Mekadesh. He's not Mekadesh, the woman, Amanachah, Titnili Matayim Zuz, and he really doesn't want her to give the Matayim Zuz. He wants her to give her the Matayim Zuz, or else he wouldn't be Mekadesh. So the fundamental dot of Kiddushin is there. The question is, you have this extra dot, which is of an appendage, which you want to use to hold back the chalot of the maaseh. So that is a chiddush of the Torah that you can do that. Okay? Yeah.
Yes, I'm thinking you could think of this as a whole marriage, or you could think of it as a sort of part marriage. Like when I'm the kadesh al Tnai, the action is there, but it's not really there if there's a separate part that the Tnai is actually part of the Maaseh Kiddushin, like that is integral. What would happen if in the middle they decided to, right, and I'm still on Eliezer's question really, to change the condition in the middle, or to say, forget it.
Because as long as it wasn't chal yet, you can change the condition.
You can say, I forget about you can be mochel on the condition, but can you also decide to say, you know what, I changed my mind, let's not get married.
Yeah.
Let's call off the deal. So it's really it hasn't happened at all. It hasn't happened at all. The marriage hasn't happened at all, and therefore.
You mean he was Mekadesh al Tnai?
He was al Tnai that this person dies before 2012.
And she says, I don't want.
It's something random, right? We win the lottery, and we don't know what's going to happen. And then in the middle, they say, you know what? I don't know what I was thinking. I met somebody else. She's much more attractive.
The Chazraba is a Gemara in Kiddushin. 1 second. Yeah. I think. We need a Gemara in Kiddushin on Daf Nun Tet. The Gemara talks about Chazraba, and then she accepted Kiddushin from someone else. Right? It gets very messy. Could be, this is an example, she could even Kudesh it to both people. It really, okay? So I don't want to get into that.
That's saying like, for basically creating it's as if you're removing the Tnai and creating a Tnai that could never be fulfilled. So you're basically being Mivatel.
No, Tnai that can never be fulfilled. That's just the Hagzama Ba'alma. That's to be Davar Shef Shalom Kaimo. Right?
So being Mivatel, so it's not so simple to say
when you mevatel the Tnai, you're saying that the Kiddushin or the Gittin is Chal,
right,
without the Kiyum of the Tnai.
It's the opposite that we're looking
Right,
at.
you were saying, so I'm not, I have to look at the Gemara in Kiddushin, definitely.
Because it's really a huge difference where you would say, like what you've set up in opposition, that,
Right.
that the Tnai is limited. But you could also think of it as the Tnai as the second half, the final action.
Right, so that's, so
In
hold
which
on,
case-
hold on, Misha. So, now let's read the Ravid, okay? The Rambam said that you don't need a dut to be mevatel the Tnai. Tnai is something afterwards, they can agree, and as long as the person in whose favor the Tnai was made agrees, right? Sometimes the Tnai is in favor of the man, sometimes the Tnai is in favor of the woman. The person that needs to agree agrees, and they can be mevatel the Tnai. Beino leveina, okay? The Ravid says, "Afal pi shebitlo beino veina shelo b'fnei edin batel atnai v'arei mikudeshet stam." That's a quote of the Rambam. And then he says, "Amar Avraham, eino kain, elen kain kinsas stam be'edim, dahavle kamo shebitel tnao be'edim." You can only be mevatel the tnai be'edim. You can't be mevatel the tnai beino leveina. And the case of kinsa is that the chuppah was b'fnei edim, and when they went into cheder yichud, he didn't say in front of the edim, "We're mevatel the Tnai." Right? Then we that right. But if he said mevatel the Tnai, so then the Tnai is batel. The Tnai has to be batel b'fnei edim. That's what the Ravid holds.
So for the Ravid, the entire, all like the whole discussion around whether if Be'ilah is mevatel the Tnai, it's all about a cheder yichud with edei yichud.
It has to be edim. Yeah, that's what he says.
Right.
We'll talk about that.
Wait.
That's what we have to talk about next week. Right?
I'm not sure I understand. He's saying that if it was initially stipulated in front of Edim, it has to be need to be
Obviously, it
in front
needs to
of
be stipulated in front of the Edim because the Kiddush is in front of Edim, right? So
then-
now,
so then you
does the
need Edim
bittul
to-
of the Tnai have to be in front of Edim? So I think it depends on how you understand the relationship between the Tnai and the Maaseh. If the Tnai is something which is not part of the Maaseh,
I hear you.
right? There's something else. There's this extra piece of dot that the Torah was mechadesh, that you have a right to make stipulations. I only agree ultimately because of this, if this happens or if that happens. But I have a baseline of dot for the Kiddushin, right? But the Tnai and the Maaseh are dvarim nifradim. That's the language of the Rush. So then you only need edut l'kiyuma davar for gittin and kiddushin. You don't need edut l'kiyuma davar on this extra dot that's floating around. So as long as they agree to mevatel the Tnai, they mevatel the Tnai, because the fundamental dot exists. But if I say that what happens when you make a Tnai, you've in a sense fashioned your own little Shulchan Aruch, right? That this kiddushin is kiddushin al menat shetitni li 200 zuz, and that's a different type of kiddushin than kiddushin without al menat shetitni li 200 zuz. So if I want to be bevatel the Tnai, that has to be b'fnei edim, because I'm changing the kiddushin.
So in the text that I've seen of Kiddushin al Tnai, there's a passage that are flying around today. There's a passage that says, and every time that we have relations from here on out,
It's as if I say.
It is as if I
know. There's some
rehash the same tonight. So l'chora, according to the Ravid, you wouldn't have to say that. Because
you don't have Edim.
Because you don't have
Right.
Because you would have to go through an extra
Unless-
effort to be mevatel
Right,
the
let's
Tnai.
then you
It's
have to
only
get into
according to
Heinei
those that
Eidi
say
Yibud,
that
Heinei Eidi Bia,
Right.
the fact that the people know that also constitutes Edim.
So it's only according to those who say that this thing could be taken out of the world rather easily. It could be mevatel rather easily without AD.
That makes
so
it more
then
of a
we
concern.
worry about
That would
what
make it more of a
happens
concern.
beino lebeina. Okay.
Okay, so that's one ramification between the two different ways of looking at the relationship between the Tnai and the Maaseh, whether it's something totally separate, and therefore the Tnai doesn't have the same rules as the Maaseh. Right? You can't be mevatel the Kiddushin already, did it already. To be mevatel the Tnai, it's without edut looking on davar, or you're changing the Kiddushin because the Kiddushin weren't chal yet, and they're bound up with this different dot. So then you need edut looking on davar to be mevatel that as well. Okay, that's one example. The other, okay, let's take a look at the Tosfot in Kiddushin on Daf Mem Tet. Okay, the case in the Gemara is very simple. It says, Hamocher Sadehu al Daita L'Meisef L'Eretz Yisrael V'lo Nasa. So the Mekach is Kayam. Right? He sold his, I think of the time of Shabtai Tzvi. People actually sold, people in Europe sold their possessions because Mashiach was here. Okay? And then, of course, we know what happened. So now could they be Mavatel the Mekach? They said, I only sold it, I'm not to go to Eretz Yisrael. But I'm not going, so I want to be Mavatel the Mekach. So the Gemara says, it's Dvarim Shebelev. Dvarim Shebelev and Am Dvarim. Right. If you wanted to stipulate that I'm only selling my house in Tnai because I'm going on Aliyah, and if I'm not going on Aliyah, then I'm not selling my house, right? So that's what you should have said, right? But you can't say, that was in my mind, I only had in mind to sell it because I was going, and now I'm not going, I want to be Mevatel the sale. So that the Gemara says is Dvarim Shebelev, and Dvarim Shebelev and Am Dvarim. Okay, that's the Gemara. Okay? Let's see what Tosfot says about this.
It's not uncommon. It's not uncommon nowadays for rental contracts to have a Mashiach clause.
Really?
Yeah.
What is the Mashiach clause?
The Messiah comes, you're kicked out. I need it for my parents.
Okay, fine. All right, we'll talk about that.
Seriously.
There's a joke in Chelm. There was somebody had a job that they, you know this joke? They had to sit on the roof at the edge of Chelm. Chelm is a real place, by the way. It's in eastern
You
Poland.
just said it is that.
What?
Your association was that it's up.
What's that? Oh, so somebody. So the job is to sit at the edge of the village on the roof and to announce when Mashiach comes. But they have to be there all the time, right? So somebody says to them, you sit there all the time in the winter and the sun, the heat and the cold and the rain and the snow. He said, the job conditions are terrible, but there's job security. Right? So the punchline in Yiddish is better. But anyway.
Wait, what is it in Yiddish?
Iber Arbeit. Eibig Arbeit. There's always work. So, okay. Anyway. So look at the Tosfot in Kiddushin. Dvarim Shebelev and in Dvarim. And Daf Mem Tet Amud Bet. Okay? Mashma. Are you with me? Dafka mishum shelo piresh dvarav. Because he didn't say anything. Aval im piresh dvarav lehedya. If he would have said explicitly, V'amar b'shat hamecher shumo chram lefi shu rotzeh lelech Eretz Yisrael, hava mecher batel. Because the Gemara says it's just Dvarim Shebelev. Because Mashma would have said, I'm selling because I'm moving to Israel. That would have been good enough. So yes, v'kashem amai haba'ina Tnai kaful. It's not enough just to say something. Gemara implies that the reason the mecher is kayam is because it's Dvarim Shebelev and Am Dvarim. So Mashma, if you would have said something, that would have been enough. So says it's not enough. What happened to Tnaim? Okay. Vare lo hitneh. She'im lo yelech lo yitkayem ameka. Okay. Now, because of this, Rashbam Piresh Gabe etrog al menat lachzir im hichziro yatsa lo hichziro lo yatsa. So, this is something that what happens. A person gives it on the first day of Yantif, right? There's a halach of shalachem. So if a person gives his daled minim in a matana manat lachzir, so if the person that received it gives it back, so then he was yotzei because he's mekayim the Tnai. If he doesn't give it back, so then he wasn't yotzei because he can't be yotzei with a lulav hagazel, right? So then he wasn't yotze. But when you say almenat lachzir, you don't say Tnai. This is in shul. I'm giving you. If I give it to you and you're yotze, and right, they don't go into this whole Megillah. So whatever happened to Tnai kaful? So he says, va'afal gav debayin Tnai kaful. Even though in general you need Tnai kaful, hani mili be'isser. It's a very big chiddush. Kagon hitkadshili al menat shetitnili matayim zuz v'chein beget. Itkin Shmuel Begita, etc. Aval b'mamon lo ba'ina Tnai kaful. All of Mishpatei Tnaim only apply to Gittin and Kiddushin, right? And to Isurin. They do not apply to Dinei Mamonot.
The Rambam doesn't think that.
No, the Rambam does not think that. The Rambam explicitly argues with that. So the Rambam, let's take a look at the Rambam. So that's how he explains the case of Adaita L'Mesach L'Eretz Yisrael, that the reason you don't need Tnai Kaful is because it's Dinei Mamonot. Okay? In Dinei Mamonot, you don't need Tnai Kaful. The Rambam, in Halacha Yud Daled, in Perek Vav Halacha Yud Daled, Yesh Miktzat Gaonim Achronim, Sha'amru She'ein Adam Tzarich L'ch...
Sorry,
Where are you now?
Sorry. Halacha Yud Daled. Perek Vav Halacha Yud Daled.
the second thing.
Okay? Yesh miktzat gaonim achronim she'amru she'ein adam tzarich l'chfol tna'o ela begittin v'kiddushin bilvad aval b'dinei mamon eino tzarich l'chfol ve'ein ra'ui l'smoch al davar zeh shekfelat ha'tnai im sha'ar arba'a dvarim mitnai b'nei Gad u'b'nei Ruvain mitnai b'nei Gad u'b'nei Ruvain lamdu otan chachamim, right? V'im lo yav, etc. V'tnai ze lo haya lo begitin v'lo b'kiddushin. V'kazeh haru gdolei ha'gaonim harishonim v'chein ra'ui la'asot. Okay, so the Rambam is cholik on this explicitly, and the proof on the face of it, you can't dispute that Tnai b'nei Gad b'nei Ruvain was not gittin in kiddushin. Okay, the Ravid v'chein haru gdolei ha'gaonim. Asot Amar Avraham Kfar Katavnu Hatam B'Sefer Mishpatim Kidivrei Ha'achronim. Okay, so take a look here in the next Rambam in Hilchot Zchiya Matana Perek Gimel Chachet. V'chol ha'omer al menat komer me'achshav dami. We'll talk about that. Okay, ve'no tzarich l'chfol t'na'o v'chein kach haru miktzat ha'gaonim v'lezedat hinoteh v'ravotai horu she'ein tzarich l'chfol ha'tnai u'lagdin hein l'lav ela begitin v'kiddushin bilvad ve'ein l'davar ze ra'aya. Okay, the Ram is a little more mellow here. He doesn't say it's wrong. He says ein l'davar ze ra'aya. The Ravid Amar Avraham afal pi she'ein ra'aya l'davar zecher l'davar v'tam gadol yesh b'davar ve'ech yitachen sheze mocher karka O notno v'omer Rachel, this is exactly your claim. Ech yitachen dezeh mocher karka o notno v'omer eni notno mochro elam ken yaseh li kach v'kach v'notzi oto miyado v'lo asa bo ma she'etna elav. How's that possible? Ava begitin v'kiddushin umdin da'atahu mekevan shenatan da'ato legaresh lekadesh eino ela kemaflig b'dvarim v'kiruv hadat v'richuk hadat ein tnai mo'il bo l'rachek u'lekarev elam kein chizku b'kfeilo u'b'chol ha'inyanim shenitparshu bo ki kulam chizuk hatnai hen ubin tavin. Okay, hold on with what he says about nachal b'nei Gad b'nei Ruvain. What's he saying? He's saying that Dinei Mamonot is fundamentally different than Gittin and Kiddushin. Okay? In Dinei Mamonot, your dot, when you enter into the transaction, is the dot of the transaction. There's nothing separate. Your dot is fused with the kinyan. I'm selling my house under these conditions because I'm going to Eretz Yisrael. I don't have to make Tnai b'nei Gad b'nei Ruvain because I didn't have dot to sell my house unless I'm going to Eretz Yisrael. And I told you, right? It's not Dvarim Shebelev. Dvarim Shebelev is, I believe you thought what you say you thought, but it takes two to tango, and there's somebody else in the picture, and even though I may believe that this is what you thought, it's not binding upon the other person. Right? Maybe you have an obligation to the other person. So that's dvarish b'levin and dvarim. So you have to communicate, right? So I communicated. I said because I'm going to Eretz Israel. But you don't need it. So you're going to tell me now I'm not going. I told them that I'm only selling if I'm going, and you're going to take it away from me anyway. That's gezel. I told you what I want. I'm a free agent over my property, and that's what I want. Right? So that means my dot is fused together with the action. But in Gittin for Kiddushin, it's not like that, or it's not naturally like that. In Gittin and Kiddushin, the person, if he's Mekadesh or Megaresh, he has dot to be Mekadesh or Megaresh. That's a powerful action. If you want to change that action, if you want to limit that action, either by creating a Tnai which is opposite the action, or if you want that Tnai to be fused and create a new action, I'm open to both formulations here, you need Mishpatei Tnaim. That's what you need Tnai B'nai Gad and B'nai Reuven to do. It's not, since you're doing a Maisa Kiddushin, we talked about how Kiddushin is different, it may need higher level of dot, for example, because of the ramifications. The ramifications are Isur Eshet Ish, right? There's something big happening which is beyond Kinyanim. So therefore, to limit that, or to fashion your own custom-made Gittin or Kiddushin, whichever way you want to formulate it, you need Mishpatei Tnaim. So it makes a lot of sense. That's what the Ravid says. In Dinei Mamonot, you're a master of the house. You want to, literally, right? You want to sell? According to your dot, you sell as long as you communicate. Right? So you don't need Mishpatei Tnaim with Dinei Mamonot, but you need it by Gittin v'Kiddushin. Okay? That's what the Ravid says. What do you do with Tnai B'nai Gad B'nai Reuven? This is very interesting in general. So he says, B'nai Gad, Nachalat B'nai Gad B'nai Reuven, Lo Hayta Muchzeket B'Yad Yisrael, Ve'eno Dome L'Karka Muchzak Bo La'adam Miyushato O Mimekcho. It's a little unclear what he means. But he's saying, what I think he's saying, is that in Dinei Mamonot, the case of B'nai Gad B'nai Reuven is not Dinei Mamonot. Dinei Mamonot is I have possession of something, either I bought it or I was Yoresh it, and I'm selling it. And I'm selling it only the way I want. This is not buying and selling property. Right? What is it? It's something else. Nobody was muhzak yet in Eretz Canaan.
But you can sell rights.
What?
You can sell rights. Can't you sell a right to inheritance or a right? You can sell rights that have not yet been actualized.
But it's not a right to ownership. That's his point. Because there's a difference between ownership and sovereignty. There are a lot of Jews in Brooklyn, right? But they're not sovereign, right? Sovereignty is more what the Ravid is saying. Sovereignty is like Isser V'Heter. It's not like Dinei Mamonot.
Is that how we understand the Nachal? Maybe this is a different topic. We understand the Nachala and Yeshua as not as ownership, as sovereignty, like the structure that we understand.
There's a sovereignty of Shevet. There is, because they have their baited. What?
It's an inalienable right. You can't sell it away. You can't sell
it's
it.
something else. It's
That's
something else. It's not
property.
ownership. That's why, without getting into the politics, right? When they say Jews should be able to live any place in Yudah Shomron because Jews should be able to live any place, it's a false argument. It might you could think that there should be Israeli sovereignty there. You should think they're not. I'm not taking a stand on that, right? But the argument to say that Jews have property rights, every place they should have property rights here, is fallacious. Because here you want the property rights in order to gain sovereignty rights. That's a political argument. That's not a human rights argument anymore. Okay? That's a different story. So there's a distinction between sovereignty and ownership. Okay? And that's what the Ravid is saying. So you can't bring any proof from B'nai Gad and B'nai Reuven. That's more like Issa V'Heter than Dinei Mamonot. So there you also need Tnai Kaful, because the taking possession of the land is sovereignty. So you need B'nai Gad and B'nai Reuven to limit that sovereignty and to adjust it. That only if X, Y, and Z will they have sovereignty over here and not over there.
Where do you see that distinction in his language? All I just see is saying we don't have it yet.
It's not Dinei Mamonot. What is it?
Right.
So there you're open. That's what I'm using. That's what I'm saying. Okay? So that's a second area which is very important to understand the relationship between the Tnai and the Ma'aseh. Okay? That in Dinei Mamonot, the conditions that you have in your mind are bound up with the Ma'aseh. You fashion the Ma'aseh. Because you're the Balabayit. You want to sell, you want to buy, you can decide. As long as you communicate to the other side. You're there, you don't need Mishpatei Tnai. So that's the Rashbam, that's the Raiv, and it's the Gaonim HaAchronim. Okay, so that's another application of this. Okay. There's something else here. The Rambam in the end of Perek Vav. The Rambam in the end of Perek Vav. Okay, these are just important halachot to know about, and it's relevant to this. Okay, when we talk about a Tnai, we're talking about if, and then when the Tnai is mikuyam, the kiddushin or the gittin take effect from the moment that the Tnai is mikuyam. Okay, so from the very outset, there's a split that's occurring between the maaseh and the taking effect of the maaseh. The taking effect of the maaseh will only be at the time when the Tnai is mikuyam. Okay? That's what the Rambam says here. He says, let's see. Hamikadesh al Tnai, halacha tet vav, in Perek Vav. Hamikadesh al Tnai, kishitkayem atnai tiyeh mikudeshet. Misha'a shenitkayem hatnai. Lo misha'a shenitkadsha. Okay, the maaseh was done, but it's not chal until the Tnai is mikuyam. Ketzad, or he gives an example. Then, Bamed Dvarim Amurim, skipping a little bit. Kish bishaya sham Tnai, v'lo amar me'achshav. Aval im amar la hareat mikudeshet li me'achshav b'dinar zeh. Im etein lach 200 zuz, ulachar zman natan la 200 zuz, harei zo mikudeshet limafreya misha'at ha'kiddushin. Afa pi shalom na'asa tnai elo la'achar zman meruba. Then she's mikudeshet limafreya. Okay? Lefichach im kitsha acher kodem she'ya'aseh atnai eina mikudeshet. V'chein hadin b'gitin u'b'mamonot. Okay? So if you stipulate me'achshav, so then the act happens limafreya. Okay? Kol ha'omer me'achshav.
So the Eina Mikudeshet is on the second guy, but before the Tnai has been chal. Is that what it is?
Right, she's not Mikudeshet to the... Right, she's not Mikudeshet to the second guy. Because
of fear that possibly she could be retroactively.
Yeah. But that, you have to see the Gemara. It's more complicated than he says, but that's... Okay. Halacha Yud Zayin. Kol ha'omer...
Excuse me,
Yeah.
just for what Mish said.
What?
Ray Mish said before, it said, לפיכך אם קידשה אחר, קודם שיקיים התנאי של ראשון, הרי זו מקודשת לשני.
That's if it's
Sort
in.
of like, but that's sort of that she can break the Tnai. She can decide she doesn't want to be married to him. Didn't you ask if you could decide you didn't want to be married to him?
Right.
And she can decide, at least to the extent...
No, but if before the Tnai is Mikuyam, if it's not Me'achshav, if she accepts Kiddushin now, she's Mikudeshet to the second guy. Because the first Kiddushin wasn't Chal yet.
So in principle, you might be able to just...
You must be able to say, forget the whole thing.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
Okay, Halacha Yud Zayin.
Is to forget the first marriage, right?
Yeah,
So it's
yeah,
like
yeah,
to
yeah,
say,
yeah.
I decided
Right.
not to follow through with
Right.
the first marriage, we can cancel it.
Right. Okay, Halacha Yud Zayin. Kol omer me'achshav, eino tzarich lichfol t'na'o, v'lo lakdim t'nai l'ma'aseh, ela af al pi shikdim ha'ma'aseh t'na'o kayam. Okay? So what does he say? This is very important. That me'achshav does not require mishpatei t'na'im. It does require sheyeh davar she'efshar l'kaimo, because otherwise you're not talking seriously, right? But the other things, you don't need t'nai kodem l'ma'aseh, v'hein kodem l'lav. You don't need that. If you're saying me'achshav. Why is that? If the action is meant to take effect now, then you don't need mishpatei hatnaim in order to fuse it with your dot, because it's happening now. When do you need mishpatei hatnaim? You need the way the Ravid talks about it. The Rambam could accept the idea, but not the example of the Ravid. Where you need mishpatei hatnaim when the Tnai needs chizuk. It's not enough to say something. You have to say it in a specific, explicit formula, which makes it more than just saying. Okay? So if you're doing the Maaseh, and the Chalot is going to be later, right? So then, since there's nothing happening now, you have to reinforce the Tnai. But if what's happening is right now, and the dot that you're expressing is happening right now, so then you don't need Tnai b'nei Gad b'nei Reuven to make it real, because you're fashioning this action with your dot without b'nei Gad b'nei Reuven, because it's happening now. If it's not going to happen until later, so you have the Maaseh now and the Chalot later. So you're doing a Maaseh now, but you want the Chalot should be according to your dot. But when your dot is happening, there's no Maaseh happening, right? So how do you do that? So you have to reinforce that the dot shouldn't just be some floaty idea. Then you need the formula. But if your action is taking effect now, then you're fashioning the action now through your dot, and you don't need the special formula to have that dot. It will take effect from now.
Correct, but there's still going to be the.
There's still a safek whether it will happen, yes. But when it happens from now. So the entire kiddushin is the dot and the maaseh are now. We just don't know until later.
So now
Right?
you can't cancel it along the way to get to a restatement.
Right, that would be that's been fashioned differently, and you don't need mishpatei atnaim. Okay, so that's a yeah.
I just want to make sure I understand. So an example of that would be, say, two people were going to get married, and they said, "Okay, we are married. We're waiting for a check to clear. It's Monday. If the check clears by Friday,
We're married
we've
now.
been married since Monday."
Correct.
Okay.
That's it, right? And then you don't need mishpatei atnaim for that, because that's been fashioned with the dot at the time.
Right. I just wanted to make sure. I
Yeah.
understood this.
Okay, so that's another example.
The
of
bottom
that.
line basically, as long as if the chalot and maaseh are split, you need the
Then you need
mishpatei. If they're
mishpatei
not split, you
atnaim.
don't.
If the chalot and the maaseh happen together, even if it's lemafreya,
Right.
so that's what the Rambam is saying. Then you don't need mishpatei atnaim.
Right.
The last thing, is the Tosfot, is the other opinion, the Tosfot in Kiddushin. Okay. On Daf Mem Tet. Okay, so the Rashbam had said, the case of the Agdaita, Lamesa Eretz Yisrael, he said there's no mishpatei atnaim in Dinei Mamonot. Okay? The Ri disagrees. V'omer Ri, did tzarich lechalek,
Where are you?
in the Tosfot in Kiddushin Mem Tet Amud Bet. Okay? Right, the case is, talking about the case of Hamocher Sadeo Amanat Lamesa Eretz Yisrael. Or Adaita, Lamesa Eretz Yisrael. V'omer Ri, did tzarich lechalek. The problem was like this. Why is it that you don't need B'nai Gad and B'nai Reuven in the case of selling your house because you're going on Aliyah? It's enough just to say so. Okay? So why is that? So the Rashbam says, you don't need it. The Ri disagrees. He says as follows: V'omer Ri, the tzarich l'chalek v'lomar, the yesh dvarim sheinam tzrichim tnai kaful, ela gilui milta, the anan sahade, the adaita dahachi avid. Let me just finish. The gam yesh dvarim shafilu gila milta lo bay, kagon hahi da kotev kol mechasav la'achirim. ושמע שיש לו בן, שהמתנה בטלה, וכן הכותב כל נכסיו לאשתו, לא עשה אלא אפוטרופה, לפי שאנו עומדים שלקח היה בדעתו. וכמו כן, אנו צהדי, ולא זבן אלא עדייתא למסק לארדי ישראל. He says there are three different levels. Okay? There are things. The first level is is my Ferrari case. That's taut. We know what your dot was. You don't have to say anything. That's not Dvarim Shebelev. If someone on their deathbed gives away all their money, and then they find out that they have a long-lost son, so of course the Matana is Batel. They thought they were childless. They gave all his money to Eliezer, right? But then he found out that he has a son someplace. So he says, no, I only gave it because I thought I didn't have any children. Now I find out I have a child. So no, you weren't matneh. Anan sahadi, that's what you meant. Okay? So that you don't even need gilui, you don't even need a gilui dat. There is a gilui dat. Anan sahadi, everybody knows that's what the dat of anybody would be. Okay? So that doesn't even need gilui dat. And then there's the middle area, which is the case in the Gemara according to Tosfot, where it makes sense that you're only selling your house to go to Eretz Yisrael, but in order that it shouldn't be Dvarim Shebelev, because there's another side here, and not everybody sells their property in order to go on Aliyah, right? So if you say, I'm selling my property in order to go on Aliyah, that's good enough. Okay? Why? Because in that case, because of the circumstances, my dat is bound up with the kinyan. Right? But in a third case, right, where the ma'aseh stands alone, whether it be Gittin and Kiddushin or Dinei Mamonot. Right? I'm selling this office building only if whatever I can buy the mall around the corner, right? So if I make a Tnai, then it's good, right? Because there the Maaseh stands alone, and you need a Tnai with Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven to fashion it. Otherwise, even though you say it, it's not binding, because fundamentally you want to sell, right? But you want, in order for your da'at to inhibit the chalot of the sale, there you need Mishpatei Tnaim of Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven. Okay? So Tosfot are using the same model. When it's Muvan Me'elav, of course that's your da'at. Right? And it's one dot. When it's not Muvan Me'elav, but it still makes sense, so then by saying that this is what you want, even without Mishpatei HaTnaim, that's good enough. And that then is included in your dot. That becomes binding. But there are certain situations where the Ma'aseh is so significant that in order to bind your dot with the Ma'aseh, or alternatively, to have dot as opposed to the Ma'aseh, either way, there you need Mishpatei HaTnaim. That's what Tosa is saying here. Okay?
No, I don't get the difference.
What?
I don't get the difference.
What don't you? There are certain ma'asim.
When do you need a Tnai Kaful as opposed
You
to
need a
Bnei
Tnai
Gad?
Kaful if there's no Anan Sahade at all. If there's no circumstances which point in that direction. Right? If there's some circumstances that point in that direction, it could still be that it's not so clear, you still have to state so explicitly. And that's the middle case. But where there's a Ma'aseh Kinyan, there's a Ma'aseh Gittin, Ma'aseh Kiddushin, fundamentally you're doing it because you want it. If you want to change that, you need Mishpatei HaTnaim. Okay, that's what Tosfot is saying here. Okay, so to summarize, what we have is as follows. We have a Ma'aseh, right? You want to limit the taking effect of the Ma'aseh through the stipulation of a Tnai. Okay? In order that situation makes sense, it has to be that fundamentally you want the Ma'aseh, and the Tnai is an additional desire that you have. Okay? So otherwise, even if you weren't Mekayim the Tnai, then did it turn off?
No, it's still going.
Okay. If you don't, otherwise, if the Tnai is batel, the Maaseh should also be batel. But no, we say the Maaseh is kayam, so it must be that you have the fundamental level of dat that this is what you really want. Okay. So therefore, in order to inhibit the Maaseh, you need a Tnai kaful. So we have this juxtaposition of the Maaseh as opposed to the Tnai. Okay? There are two ways of talking about it. Either the first way, the Maaseh as opposed to the Tnai. The Tnai is something which is external to the Maaseh, and then for sure you could be Mevatel the Tnai. Okay? And then you don't need, even in Gittin and Kiddushin, you would not need Eidim, Eidut L'Kiyum Adavar to Mevatel the Tnai. The Raiva says you do need Eidut L'Kiyum Adavar to Mevatel the Tnai. That would seem to indicate a different model, where through making the Tnai, you have fashioned a new Ma'aseh, right? A Ma'aseh which has your unique dot. It's a custom-made Ma'aseh. Okay? Now, if it's Matna Masha Katuv Torah, so then you don't have the authority to make a marriage that doesn't have a chiyuv of Sher Ksut V'ona, for example. You want to fashion a new type of marriage, well, that's not on the books. We don't recognize that marriage, right? So therefore, you're married and your Tnai is nothing, okay? So, in terms of the ability to incorporate your dot into the action in a unique way, there we saw certain limitations of where it would be required to have the Mishpatei Tnaim and where it wouldn't be, right? If it's not required to have Mishpatei Tnaim, it means in those situations, you can incorporate your dot to the Maaseh with greater ease, because you're more the Balabayit. So that's where you get this shita of the Ravid and of the Rashbam, that you don't need Mishpatei Tnaim Dinei Mamonot, for example. Whereas in Gittin and Kiddushin and Yerushat Haaretz, right, you're not the Balabayit, right? You can't just say, I want it this way. If you want to change it, you need Mishpatei Tnaim. Okay? That's what the Ravid would say. Right? Or, according to the Rambam, you don't need Mishpatei Tnaim if you say Me'achshav. Because right now, since it's being Chal now, and you're saying it now, you're fashioning something new, even without Mishpatei Tnaim. You need Mishpatei Tnaim when the Tnai is just floating off by itself and the Chalot is going to be later, in order to make sure that you've limited what's happening now, right? You have to have Mishpatei Tnaim. Okay? That was the second thing. And the third thing is what Tosot says, that there are different situations. The situations which are ta'ut, it's muvan me'elav, right? So there you don't even have to say anything. There are certain situations where it makes sense that that's what somebody would want, but it's not so explicit. So since there's another side that stands to be harmed, their interests can be damaged by your desire. So you have to say, because I'm going on Aliyah. You just have to let the person know. And then there's certain things, again, where the Maaseh is so serious, whether it's Gittin Kiddushin or Kinyanim, where there's a transfer of ownership, so there you need Mishpatei Tnaim. Okay? That's it. All right, so let's take a 5-minute break. And we'll do a